This first module, now moving on to Islam, deals with Muslim worlds of meaning, the teaching of Islam. And so we will, this module address with the teachings, and we'll do the history of Islam, and then we will go on to the devout practices of an everyday Muslim.
Of course, now the question is, who was Muhammad? And although there are other religious traditions where a faith tradition, a great faith tradition, is centered around a singular figure, aka in the East, Siddhartha or the Buddha, in the West, Jesus of Nazareth with Christianity. What is unique about Muhammad, in addition to being that singular figure, he was able to straddle the world of the sacred, of the prayer, mysticism, with the practicalities of rule. Now, he's considered the final prophet in the Islamic tradition. And one, as my Muslim friends are quick to point out to me, that Mary, the mother of Jesus, is mentioned more in the Quran than she is in the New Testament Gospels. And that is that these great figures of the Abrahamic tradition, from Abraham and Moses, or even back to Adam, and Jesus are considered a long line of prophets. God's revelation is ongoing, and then the culmination is in the Prophet Muhammad. He was born approximately the year 570. And we'll see he lives to about 632. So he was able to live a full life, a very diverse, adventurous life in many respects, and had met challenges. He received the revelation of the Quran, and he is a preacher, a teacher, and a political leader. This is what's unique about Muhammad. Significant sites that you can see when we talk about these, especially when we get to the history. Mecca, you can see that in Arabia, or let's say Saudi Arabia, near the Red Sea, and then above it is Medina, and then you can see where some of the other sites are. Of course, we've got Damascus up there, but Jerusalem has the third most important mosque, maybe site after Mecca and Medina in the Islamic world, with the Dome of the Rock. And then you can see where Beirut, Lebanon is, Damascus, Syria, where so much stuff right now with the ISIS insanity. Then you got Cairo and Alexandria where it was, and Cairo, Egypt today. And so Alexandria is really on the Mediterranean coast. You have to the left, you have Tripoli, Libya, and Tunisia. And then if you go towards the Asian side, you got Tehran, or Baghdad. That's where Baghdad is in Iraq. And of course, you see the Tigris and Euphrates rivers there, which we talked about Genesis was key. It's like creation. In Kabul, in Afghanistan, again, key place. You heard a lot of Kabul in the news. Well, it sits in the eastern part of Afghanistan, as you can see. About the Holy Quran, it is, the Muslims will say, it is a literal word of God. It's in Arabic originally, and it's very poetic too. There's 114 chapters or surahs. They're put from like the longest to the smallest in the Quran. The sort of chapters, teachings of the Quran. So these are basic stuff. That God is one, very transcendent. That's notion of transcendent. If we look at, I should say, the three great religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and just for back up for a second, Islam and Judaism are very much on the transcendence of the divine. Although creation is good and everything else, Christianity, because of its Trinitarian experience and of course with the teaching that Jesus is the Son of God, has more of a, we say, incarnational or immanent balance of the creative tension in Christianity between those two. And so that's why Christianity, you have images, you don't shirk away from that. It's a different understanding. But in Islam, it is God is one. There's only one in there. And prophecy, there's a reality to it. As a matter of fact, you look at in the Quran, Moses and Jesus and of course Abraham are a lot of the prophets that the Hebrew scriptures and in early Christianity are in the Quran. As a matter of fact, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is mentioned more in the Quran than she is actually in the Gospel. So there's a lot of overlap. There's going to be, ever since we've had it with Zoroastrianism and Christianity and Judaism, there's going to be a day of judgment and a strong part of the afterlife. There's things on angels, or sometimes you have the jinn. It's very God-centered. Then every day you got like the Jews have the Shema, the big confession of the devout Muslim is the Shahada. There is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And you say that a lot. So now this is one thing where Muslims are different than Jews, where Jews will not mention, the divine name. They have other names for God, but not that of the one divine name. Muslims, except in rare occasions, Muslims have no compunction about speaking the divine name Allah. In fact, they have to think about 99 names for God. They have other expressions like if Allah wills, inshallah. Every surah of the Quran begins with the name, with Allah. Okay, Allah. And it mentions also the unity of God. The Tawhid is a confession that stresses the unity of God. So God fills up the entire universe. There's a sense of absolute monotheism. As a matter of fact, you can look at some of these, the oneness of God and unity on pages 241. You can deal with some of this about, and that opening the Al-Fatiha, is a beautiful prayer. God is absolutely transcendent. We said that. God grants freedom, and this is enough for humanity to have moral responsibility. What are some of the qualities of the divine? God is one of them. So the Bismillah Bismillah. It begins all but one statement in the Quran. And then, again, we said, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the most compassionate. Therefore, compassion and mercy are at the center of God's qualities. Again, there's a lot of overlap here with, like, especially with Judaism stuff, they said. It has said in Judaism, with compassion and mercy. So evil can come from two sources. And this is another question, a challenge that you always have with in the great faiths. How do you address evil? It can be a test of God, or secondly, humans can bring evil to themselves by their exercise of free will.
Islam has many qualities in common with Judaism in terms of creation, and also with Christianity, in that it also teaches that the creation of the world uses 6 days. But there is no long narrative as you have in Genesis 1, where God created, then God said, "Let there be light," and then there was light. Kind of a bit long poetic. This is much more simple. And look at Surah 36, verse 82. God's simple command is be. One word command, boom. And it happens. There's no rest on the seventh day, like God doesn't take a time out in Islam as God does in Judaism and Christianity, but it says that God then kind of sits on the throne, kind of surveys what's going on. Therefore, you don't have a Sabbath day in Islam the same way that you do in Judaism or Christianity. However, there is a communal day of prayer Friday. It's not considered a Sabbath. However, there will be more elaborated services. You might get a structured service with a sermon from Imam. And so it is the religious leader. So it's a little bit more formal. And if you can make it to the mosque any day at all, and that's a day. And it's also a big community gathering day as well.
Now, what about creation in Islam? The created realm. The creation is a servant of God, abd. This is very similar to the Hebrew, and that's Arabic word, the Hebrew word abad. Again, to serve. It serves God. Therefore, there's a natural Islam. The stars, elements, and animals. They all, by doing what they do, worship God. They give glory to God. And humans participate in natural Islam by creation care. And there's a link to a YouTube there which addresses some of that and how the teachings about creation care in Islam as well. So what is Islam today? It's, again, mentioned that it's the second largest religion after Christianity. It's most Muslims, as I mentioned earlier, are not Arab. And as I mentioned earlier, Indonesia is the largest Muslim country.
There's other supporting literature in addition to the Quran. There's the Sunnah and the Hadith. The Sunnah is reporting the way of life of Muhammad, but Another piece of literature you see is the hadith, the reports collected by Muhammad's companions about his life, kind of biographical notes. We will returning to that consideration in the next module. Now, for women in Islam, this is the teachings has been all over. It's been very percolating. For instance, the Quran introduces new rights for women. This is very much akin to, I'm thinking of similar by analogy what you see in some of the pastoral letters in the Christian scriptures. The Timothy and Titus there, where one looks at, they say about submissive, so headship, submission, and that. But one has to look at it in the context of first century life and how, some ways, in respect for women, given where they were, how radical and the trajectory it is going. And that's key. Similar to Quran, women were very much almost like chattel. And you look at, we get into Muhammad's own life and the way his wife, that he treated with great respect. And his first wife, until she passed. But there was a sense of women, there was a liberation. Their variation in women's, even today, in women's roles in Muslim countries today. You have women such as in Pakistan and other places where they play prominent roles, Indonesia, like in the Asian continent, obviously in certain places like Yemen. It's a whole different story. So it's not one size fits all in terms of interpretation of the Quran. All the Quran says is one verse which says that women need to be dressed, be modest. That's it. There's nothing, a hijab, a burqa, nothing stipulated. The video and the life of Muhammad, again, I'll keep referring to that you're to watch during these few modules, has a beautiful discussion of how different people interpret that in the present, and different cultures have seen that text and adapted it accordingly. And again, the context was that after Muhammad's wife died and he remarries, now he marries several women, and it's a lot of political alliances, and he doesn't want to mess things up or get things, and that's not that anybody get distracted or anything. So you got these visitors coming or whatever. He doesn't want any scandalous talk or any stuff like that. So, just use common sense. And that's what we said, that women dress modestly. And there are a lot of reforms in the modern world. We had a video, Coming Malia, the women's role that are really speaking forth, and you've got some strong women in history and in contemporary world, in this cross-Islamic world, who are looking at new possibilities. And, how does that mean? What does it mean to be a Muslim woman, and particularly in the West, and how you can live that out? So it's, again, there's not one answer, one size fits all for every situation, for every culture, particularly in the context with Western, and sometimes there's, people make compromises with dress and the like in Western culture. So it's dynamic.
So there's some differences. How do we compare like the other Islam and some of the other religions that we've encountered? Like, for instance, in creation, Judaism and Islam. Judaism gives a detailed description of creation. God rests the Shabbat, Sabbath on the seventh day. Humans are made in the image and likeness of God. That we can create, we can do. And humans have a dominion or stewardship of created realm. I'm not to trample on it, but to impact it as God has. In Islam, there's no detailed description of the days of creation, since that they weren't 6 days. There's no rest, as we mentioned, on the seventh day. There's no talk, language specifically about image and likeness, but God does put God's spirit in humans. And humans, there are Khalifa of creation. They're caretakers, care over, in a sense. They have an intelligence that discerns the true and the false, ability to discern. They have free will. They can choose. And they also have a power of speech, to articulate speech to worship God. I mean, the other animals, birds and stuff can worship God, but, by just through there, it's not a conscious kind of say, I praise you, God. Why is there evil in the world? Unlike Christianity, there's no notion of original sin. Humans are Muslim by nature. We surrender, we serve God, to servants of God by nature. We worship God. Humans are negligent. We're careless, and we're forgetful. And that's something I would say that, I always just say sin is a combination of being myopia and amnesia. That and myopia, equivalent to negligent, is that I only look out for myself, self-centered. And then forgetful means that we forget who we are as children of God. And this is very close to what I think the teachings here of Islam. Let's look more into this about sin and negligence. It's when we become negligent of our surroundings, and like me, we become slave of our passions. I used to say, isn't it ironic that the more you give into your passions, the less passion you have for life and everything? Forgetfulness is that people become spiritually drowsy and walk in a dream. I had a story once by, maybe I've told this, but you heard this, where the guy says, Jaime, it's time to get up. He says, I don't want to get up. He says, son, come here. He says, well, why, Dad? He says, come on, I don't want to get up. So why don't you want to get up, son? He says, well, school's hard and I'm tired and all the kids make fun of me. And father says, well, son, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why. First, it's your duty. Secondly, you're 45 years old. Third, you're the teacher or the principal. So the sense is that you can, forget who we really are, and gets kind of some instead of spiritual teachers that we go through our whole lives. It's like we're in a dream. We're never awake, and awakening becomes aware. Now the unbelievers are the kafirs. These are people or folks who are forgetful and negligent. They no longer acknowledge God as the source, and they're blind to the designer of it all. The kafirs inevitably become mushriks. And your text talks about shirk, it's the mushriks, those who associate other things with God. It's akin to, kind of like an idolatry. It's akin to that's saying, like, I worship other things other than, and you're foolish because it doesn't give you life. They're totems. So the goal of the spiritual life um, is, for Christianity, would say, how can I be saved? And again, the notion of original sin. And the remedy then for Christians would be surrender to God's grace. For Muslims, it's how can I achieve the life of felicity or falah? It has a more optimistic notion of human nature, that we, like we're not coming out with our heads tied out. There's this possibility of grace, and so therefore the remedy for the devout Muslim, is to come to self-awareness, be reminded of our true nature, who we are. For Christianity, faith is a trust. It's you step out, a leap of faith, if you will, that God will catch you. Faith is fostered by Scripture, worship, prayer, centering on Jesus, etc. Okay, also stepping out and doing good works. And you have priests and bishops who are guides or ministers. For Islam, faith comes to us through rational knowledge. Again, it's more intellectual. Its faith is fostered to some degree similar by reliance on the Word, on the prophets, on the Quran, and also doing good. And it's an exercise of one's free will. There's no priesthood in Islam. However, you do have guides like imams, and who have kind of like almost like spiritual directors or guides for life. It's in Islam, which means surrender again. Our surrender to God is possible through awareness in our free will. And Sharia is the path of transformation. It's based on application of Sharia, which is the code of behavior of Islam. It's taken from the Quran and the Hadith. Jihad is a struggle in following Sharia. Now, jihad sometimes refers to war in defense of God's law. That's been co-opted by terrorists. So, but overwhelmingly in Islam, in Islamic teaching, it's more an interior. It's like I said, it was hijacked, but it refers to our personal spiritual struggle. Remember, I mentioned that thing in Judaism about you may overcome it. Tim Schill. It's that same kind of sense that it's hard, but you could do it. But it's the pathway of going towards holiness. So what about again, Christianity and Islam in terms of the afterlife? Christianity contains more metaphoric language about the afterlife, poetic kind of sense. Rewards and punishments are based on how one did in this life. One difference is that Islam tends to go into more sensual description. You think of the 1,001 Nights, the stories of it. The reward, but some of the reward and punishment is based on how one did in this life. So it's very consistent from Zoroastrianism on. It's very much a strong ethical religion and has consequences. In the area of adapting to life in the contemporary West, do you think that from what you've read and based on your own reflection, is the challenge for the faithful Muslim more difficult, less difficult, or the same as it would be for the faithful Jew or Christian? And why do you think so? Especially if you think of how long, for many Muslims, have been exposed to. A lot of times it was only in the 20th century. So maybe look at that there's sometimes where there's some tensions. This may be where this is coming from. One thing I just back into speaking of this about women, like the Ajib, that women are expressing their freedom. Like people have said culturally, the freedom. In fact, I was on the news the other day, a woman was saying the freedom she's the first sheriff or something from Wayne County, and they were in a gym. She said she got no flack. She said that meant a lot to her, that she could do her job as a Wayne County sheriff and help in the courts. And for herself, this is for herself, but she's not trying to lay it on anybody else. Her expression. So it's that I thought it was a very interesting news story that kind of reflected, especially in our country,